item 13. Councillor Brown, I think you're proposing. And Councillor Charles is seconding.
Second that, Chair.
Councillor Brown, over to you. Domestic abuse policy.
This new policy is our commitment to building a safer Harlow. It's not a mere box-ticking exercise. It's a meaningful handbook designed to help and empower people affected by domestic abuse to live a life free from chaos and conflict. It's also our promise to educate all of us, councillors and staff, so we can spot the signs and provide consistent, informed help and guidance. To that end, domestic abuse training has become a fundamental part of the onboarding process for all staff and councillors. This living document outlines the Council's zero-tolerance approach to domestic abuse. There is never an excuse, and it ensures perpetrators are held accountable for their actions. It also recognises children as victims in their own right, committing to educating young people about healthy relationships through initiatives like the annual Crucial Crew event for every Year 6 pupil. Additionally, we shall include a self-referral link to NHS West Essex Talking Therapies for mental health and support, and a link to Clare's Law. And we will consistently update the policy as new and relevant information becomes available. A vast amount of work has gone into this policy, and I want to thank everyone who contributed, both internally and our external partner experts, for ensuring it is a robust and effective document that clearly sets out how the Council will respond. I urge you all to please support it, read it and refer to it.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Charles, anything you want to add?
Thank you, Chair. I'll make my comments towards the end. Thank you.
Super. Any questions? Councillor Shears?
Thank you. I have a few questions. First of all, I'd like to say it's a really good policy. I'm really pleased with the policy. It's good to see. Page 52. We talk about elected members and ward councillors requiring to participate in mandatory training. Good to see. Have all members done that, or is that being arranged now? I know there's been some training, but have all members done that?
They are being arranged now, but I think most have, yeah.
Thank you. It also goes on to talk about the DASH, and it says some employees will be trained in DASH. How many will that be, and will that cover every department?
There will be a relevant representative across all the departments. There'll be somebody sitting in each area.
It's really important. I think I research does show that the most dangerous time for victims of domestic abuse is when they're leaving relationships. And so the DASH and the MARAC are really, really important tools. So I'm pleased to hear that every department will have somebody that can actually use that tool properly. Thank you. Page 53. It talks about in cases where those affected have no recourse to public funds, the team will offer advice, support and signposting as appropriate. Signposting where? Do we have any charities within the town that can help?
Yeah, sure. It will be Safer Places in Essex would be one of them that we'd refer them to.
Sorry, say again.
Safer Places in
And
Essex
Safer
would be
Places,
one that
yeah.
we would refer to.
Okay. And so going on from there then, what support does this council give our local domestic abuse service, Safer Places?
Sorry, could you just repeat that? I didn't hear you properly.
Yeah, surely. So, just going on from that, what direct support does this council give our local domestic abuse service, Safer Places?
Yeah, sorry. Do you mind clarifying what you mean by support?
Okay, so we've got a charity within Harlow, Safer
Yeah.
Places, that supports people that are fleeing from domestic abuse. And what I'm asking is, does this council give any direct support to that charity? And I mean, you know, financial, in kind, whatever.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Safer Places are a valued partner. For example, they're working with us on the Women's Safety Charter that we recently formally launched. The key for us is one of the big concerns in the town is the solve rate of domestic abuse cases isn't where it needs to be. We're working not only with Safer Places, but the police and our Police and Crime Commission to deal with those sorts of issues. So they're a valued partner. Where we can work with them on specific initiatives, we do. And of course, they are working with the Police and Crime Commissioner to fulfil his obligations in his police and crime plan around violence against women and girls, as well as a number of Essex charities that are involved in this space.
Just to add to that as well, obviously they act as the independent domestic abuse violence advisors,
Yes,
which
I
we
know.
give them grant funding for as well. So
Okay.
the council supports them with grant funding directly.
Thank you. Right, going down a bit further then on page 53 in actions against perpetrators. And you talk about, you know, the possibility of taking enforcement action, and there's some, you know, around perpetrators' tenancies. Again, there are just one of the things that concern me is that if they're living with their partner, is that going to put that person at further risk? So it would have to be done in a very careful way. And presumably, if it's bad enough via MARAC or whatever. But what happens to the victim? Are they going to be given permanent accommodation elsewhere? Maybe they can't stay in that property, because would that be safe?
Do you want it? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so obviously there's two elements to that. With a council tenancy, normally the person being abused can approach another local authority to seek advice, and obviously there is requirements that they do that through the homeless legislation, so that picks that up. In terms of domestic abuse with a perpetrator, it is a breach of tenancy if they are forcing somebody out of that tenancy. We wouldn't go down the route of enforcement until the person was safe and rehoused somewhere else. There are some circumstances where that person does leave, and then that tenant is able to go back to that property. So each case is evidential and is on a case-by-case basis. So there are routes that we use, such as harassment panels, etc., etc. But there are provisions both within allocations and the homeless legislation for the victim of domestic abuse. And then once that's resolved, then we will consider what, you know, potential enforcement action, which could be possession, but it's not. That's one of many options that we can take.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks for
Councillor
clarifying that.
And just to add to that, Chair, on the Safer Essex Board, the Southend Essex and Thurrock Domestic Abuse Board, in its own right, has been working with a number of councils that are looking at this particular issue and the housing situation for domestic abuse victims. There are initial discussions about an initiative that board is looking to take through on a county basis, and there are some local authorities. We're in discussion with them about how we can best support those victims in that specific circumstance that you've illustrated there. There are only initial discussions, and these are for the experts in this area to further that with local authorities, but it's a potential initiative that could actually bring a lot of benefit to those domestic abuse victims that find themselves in that situation.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So, right in the next paragraph, it talks about, with consent, we will support perpetrators to access behaviour change programmes. Are there any in Harlow? Are there any of those programmes in Harlow?
Just turn your microphone.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Essex, again, SETDAB is looking at a specific perpetrator intervention that has been trialled by the British Psychological Association around obsessive compulsive disorder, which is a particular trait of individuals that demonstrate domestic abuse or stalking. That is something that SETAB is looking at very carefully. There is no specific intervention in Harlow at the moment, but I have specifically called for that Essex initiative to be rolled out and piloted across the county, because I think it would again deal with some of the root causes of why these people cause such terrible crimes.
Any further questions? We'll just pop it back.
Yeah, I have another question. Page 58, what's the... And this is around older victims, so it talks about, you know, different people. And what I'd like to know is that I know quite often that when people approach the council with regards to domestic abuse, quite often they will be referred to a refuge. And I just wondered if that is our main policy for older people, because what I do know is, having worked in refuges for many years, that it isn't the best place for older people.
It's not the only route that we take. As I say, every case is very different. We will look at the evidence behind the case, and then we will look at the best solution for that individual. We're also in the process of reviewing a housing domestic abuse policy. We needed to wait for the corporate one to be assessed and look to be approved at Cabinet tonight. So we will look at all of those elements within what we can then do from a housing perspective. So a refuge isn't our first port of call. We will look at the requirements and the vulnerabilities of that individual before we then determine what is the best and safest method for them to be accommodated.
Councillor Gunn.
Thank you, and thank you to Councillor Brown for bringing forward this important report. It's one of the most difficult areas that we deal with, and I really welcome it. She's engaged with me a bit on the topic I have concerns around, so hopefully this won't be a surprise question. But when it comes to partnership working, will that involve looking to work with other local authorities on helping support people who have previously been domestic violence victims, who've been moved out of area to return home to their home district when it is safe to do so?
Yes, that is something that the council will be working on.
Councillor Griggs.
Reference was just made to the potential that a victim survivor may in time return to their previous tenancy, their previous property. What security measures would be taken to ensure that that is safe? I mean, would it, as a matter of routine, would the locks be changed, for example, maybe install CCTV?
Take that.
Yeah, I mean, we have a sanctuary scheme that we use, that we work very closely with the police on in the past. So if they do return, if they're able to return, and sometimes victims of domestic abuse can take their own injunction out and obviously get that perpetrator removed from the property so they can return, depending on the circumstances. So we will work and do general repairs. So we put extra locks on, we put keychains, we put keyholes indoors if requirements, in line with fire safety requirements of that. It will really depend on the requirement of that individual, but we have put additional safety measures within that property. The sanctuary scheme does allow, we do have a fund that if we need to make a safe room within a property, we have done that in the past, where if they have a safe space within that property, if they feel it needs to go there. I think we also, as I say, it's very evidential. So yes, it's good if that person can return, but sometimes it's not safe for the return. It could be wherever the perpetrator is within the area. We also take advice from the police on what their recommendations are, which is why a lot of the time, a lot of the victims do approach another local authority because maybe it's not safe for Harlow. But if it is, then we do make those additional security measures within the property they return to.
Yep, Councillor Griggs.
I welcome this document for starters. I also it is really good. I've actually read through it 2 or 3 times just to make sure I was getting the information correct, and that is that it is a wonderful example of writing a totally gender-neutral document, which I think is excellent, because what is frequently forgotten is that approximately 1/3 of cases are of violence, domestic abuse against men. And that's not reflected in the provision of refuge spaces, probably across the country. I remember asking Councillor Charles about this some while back, And you agree with me then that the provision is not proportionate to the number. So I guess the question is it quite rightly focuses on violence against women and girls because that is the biggest issue. But what measures further are going to be taken to ensure provision and assistance for male victims or survivors, because they are frequently, I know it's a really challenging subject for anybody to speak about, but it's often harder for a man to come forward and admit that they have been put in this position.
Thank you, Chair. Look, it's an important question, and I appreciate in my previous comments I was focusing particularly on violence against women and girls, but the whole issue around male domestic abuse is a major problem in our society. There are two key things I'd just focus on. Rightly, and this is where I do welcome what the government is doing, they are currently consulting under Wes Streeting a men's health strategy that's encompassing a number of strands of government departments to coalesce around a single strategy that deals with not just the health consequences of poor lifestyle choices, but the wider issues around domestic abuse and so on, which I think is incredibly valuable and is something that government hasn't done previously. So that will have a bearing on what local decisions are made going forward as well. The other aspect to this is the importance of local authorities working with male domestic abuse charities. One most notable that runs the Men's Health Day, Awareness Day, is Mankind. There are other charitable organisations, but that comes to mind because they run the national campaign around those issues. So do not get me wrong. What Councillor Brown has done here is positioned the Council's domestic abuse strategy in a gender-neutral way. There are specific issues amongst those genders, but what we are waiting for is this steer nationally under the Secretary of State for Health with the men's strategy about how we can operate going forward locally.
Thank you for that, and obviously, yes, we do need to wait and see to some extent what comes forward from Wes Streeting on that, and I'm sure, knowing him, that he will come forward with some good practices that we can take forward on that. Just developing on the theme of the men's strategy, it's also, I think, important to take a look at the way the council reacts to cases that are brought to its attention, and I'm not going to obviously name any names or anything, but Mr. Gardner and I had an exchange just a couple of weeks ago where a male victim of domestic abuse was presenting to the council, and I believe he was treated in a completely different way to it would have been had a woman presented in the same position. Now, I'm thankful to James and to Lisa for stepping in and dealing with that and resolving the matter very quickly, but I think it's really important, and I know this isn't really a question, but we'll bear with, but I think it's really important that that is looked at, and maybe, James, we can look at that as a particular example to analyse what went potentially wrong with that situation and why it needed that level of intervention, because the gentleman in question had been talking to the council for 7 weeks before he came to me with it. We managed to get it resolved in 3 days.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've landed a really constructive point there. And the bottom line is that we pass no judgment on anyone, irrespective of their gender, who presents as a domestic violence victim. That's something that I think Councillor Brown's policy will help inform going forward in terms of the culture of the council into responding to these sorts of issues. I'm grateful for the case study you've presented there. I'm sure that Councillor Brown, I certainly would as well, would like to learn more about that case study so that obviously the officers in the council understand the consequences of what's happened there. But again, the most important thing is we've got this new policy coming in under Councillor Brown that will hopefully aid in those sorts of situations.
Again, not really a question, but I'll just follow up on that and say it goes without saying that I'd be very happy to sit down with the pair of you and talk this through and work out, what that situation was and if there is anything to be learned from it.
Very happy, Chair.
Any further questions? No, any comment? Oh, Councillor Morrison.
I'd like to make a brief comment. In common with previous speakers, questioners, I'm very pleased to see this paper brought here and in such detail. A lot of work has clearly gone into this, and it's very welcome indeed. Councillor Griggs has reminded us that there is a great deal of work still to be done, and I'm sure that you would acknowledge that. Sometimes it can seem an intractable issue because it's always there. It doesn't seem to be going away or decreasing. We know that the challenge continues, and we have to be prepared to continue to face it, to tackle it head on, if that doesn't sound too violent. I'm particularly pleased to see that, as well as information about dealing with the effects, there's also some information about dealing with the causes, touching on the importance of healthy relationships. Councillor Charles has just mentioned that, and the causes why people, we make them people, behave in this way, in this dreadful, shocking way. There's also mention of White Ribbon Day, I notice, which is the 25th of November. And the 25th of November is also International Day for the elimination of violence against women. So, if you're available, come to the obelisk at 7 o'clock that evening, 25th of November. Thank you.
Any further comments? Councillor Charles?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just, first of all, welcome what Councillor Brown has done with the domestic abuse policy. Clearly there is a crossover between what Councillor Brown does from a policy perspective and what I undertake in my capacity as the public protection lead in terms of enforcement. The Safer Harlow Partnership continues to have domestic abuse as one of its core priorities. The Council works closely not just with safer places but changing pathways as well. And the work that is undertaken by, simplified, SETDAB, the South Essex Thurrock Domestic Abuse Board, is second to none around looking at some of the specific case studies and how we action them as public entities. For me, one of the core aspects of this is not just supporting the victims of domestic abuse, but it's actually tackling the perpetrators. We've touched on specific interventions around behaviours. There are gateway crimes like stalking that are very sinister. There has been only very recently a documentary on Channel 4 that's explored a particular stalking case that was quite menacing. We need to challenge these issues in our society. One aspect here locally that we're doing is putting in place a policy that not only deals with violence against women and girls and the issues around that, but some of the other gender-specific issues that Councillor Griggs has rightly touched on. I think Councillor Brown now will work very closely with officers to take this forward. For me, what is particularly important going forward is that we get behind the Women's Safety Charter in the town. I congratulate the work that Karen Wybrow, the consultant who worked with us on that, has done. The community safety team is working with businesses and other organisations to establish more safer places for women. There is a point there to take on board male domestic abuse victims as well. But of course, let's not forget the J9 initiative and the efforts that we put into that. The training element to this is really important, not just for councillors, but for officers as well. So I think this is a fantastic piece of work that Councillor Brown has done, and of course, she will be leading that forward. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you. Councillor Brown, I think you want to? No? In which case, we shall move to the recommendations as they're set out. Are those agreed? Agreed.